Happy Sunday. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you.
It's crazy, man. It feels like it's been a long time coming, but literally been a couple weeks, but I'm excited about it as well. How you feeling?
I am feeling great. I think we should probably start by letting people know who we are. So if you're joining us tonight, whether it's through Facebook, whether it's through Instagram, I'm Janie Lacy. I'm the CEO of Life Counseling Solutions. We're a full service counseling center in Maitland, Florida. And this topic is dear to my heart for many reasons that I'll share with you today.
Awesome. And I am Stephen Ivey. I am here, a local resident of Orlando, Florida, and I am on staff at Live Church Orlando, but I'm a local minister and speaker and worship leader and all that good stuff. But I am, before any of that, just a good friend of yours and would love to be able to have this conversation tonight.
Well, it sounds like you wear many hats, and I know our viewers are looking forward to your male perspective. So we are so happy that you are joining us tonight. You know, one of the first things I think it's a good foundation for us to lay down is about how the whole Me Too movement has even started. I want to say and start off by the movement is really just about sexual harassment and assault and just really empowering women to speak up. Because whenever we have these conversations, Stephen, sometimes people will say, well, men are sexually harassed, or what about the women who cry wolf? We're not talking about those cases. We're talking about legitimate cases and how everything kind of took form October 27th, even though the Me Too movement started years ago through a civil rights leader. Did you know that?
Actually, yeah. I heard a little bit about that and some of the research for this, but it's incredible, this movement, how it's formed, how it's maintained itself through certain times and now resurged in this generation to really be something powerful for people. So
I believe back in October 2017, Alyssa Milano really kind of took things to social media, in particular because of the whole hashtag and to empower people to share their stories following the whole Harvey Weinstein situation. You know, so since that, we've been hearing so many stories, not only on social media, but you know, there's been these people getting fired that been hosts for long periods of time. So it's been really interesting to kind of see this take form.
Yeah, that was huge. I mean, literally when that happened, it just spurred a series of other Me Too's, you know, and I think that's really the power of the movement itself, you know, is that whole idea that someone's not isolated to a specific experience, but that there are other people out there who've had it as well. And in essence, you know, anytime a Me Too has happened in culture, it's changed the world. I mean, really, from all kinds of different, you know, events that have happened culturally. You know, we could even talk about, you know, Martin Luther King as a great leader. I mean, he's a great leader, but had nobody else said, you know, me too, I'm not going to deal with this either. I agree. It's really the power of agreement, you know, when people come together and they stand for something. So when she did that, I mean, it really just opened up the door wide open for a lot of people to be able to share their stories and say, it wasn't just you, it's myself as well. Yeah.
So as a male in particular, you know, Tony Robbins, who I'm a fan of, actually got to meet him and see him last year in Atlanta. He's such a motivational strategist when it comes to business and psychology. We've known him, you know, in our entertainment space and our motivational business space for a long time. But he made the headlines with the whole Me Too movement. And what that really meant to me, Stephen, was that men sometimes, not always, can be seen as being insensitive around the topic when they don't necessarily not mean to be. And I think about Tony Robbins making a comment that, you know, we can debate what he really meant about it, but it opens up the conversation about what this means for men in particular. So when this started exploding, the whole movement, hearing all the things that we're talking about, I'm wondering, just from a male standpoint, what kind of hit your brain when this kind of took form in our country?
Let me just tell you about Tony Robbins. And he is very well known for just being a very inspirational guy. You know, he's a motivational speaker. For those who don't know who Tony Robbins is, if you're watching, you're like, who in the world is Tony Robbins? Never heard of him. He's a motivational speaker, life coach, that type of thing. And he really does spend a lot of time encouraging people to achieve their best self and that kind of thing. And so to have a woman stand up in his audience and really kind of challenge him on what he thought about the Me Too movement, and his response was more so, for those who didn't see it again, his response was more so kind of like, he almost from this sense that people were using it just to feel significant. Like, I'm just attaching myself to this movement so that I can gain some sort of significance. And I think to ultimately assume that and not know that is irresponsible, you know, from a man's perspective, and then, you know, I know we're not going to bend this towards men who have also been abused, but if we're in the light of women who have been abused, I think it's really easy, just from a personality standpoint, for men to be insensitive to the issue. And that's just my first response to it. You do have some men who kind of get it and understand, but by and large, I think the majority, because of they haven't experienced it. I mean, let's just be honest, unless you've walked in someone's shoes and being able to have that perspective, or at least the perception, because that's really what it's all about, to be able to see things as someone else sees it. I think you just kind of have to walk in those shoes a little bit. And since men, you know, to a large degrees haven't, and to large degrees have been propagators of this particular thing, I think it really, really has put men in a position where they kind of have to intentionally open up. They have to intentionally broaden their horizon to say, okay, let me not just respond off of what I would normally respond, but let me really be intentional about, okay, I haven't walked in their shoes, but how can I understand their perspective and what they're going through? And so from a men's perspective, me personally, it's easy for me as a pastor, and okay, let me take myself out of the situation and put myself in their shoes, because we have to do that all the time. But for most men, I think that might be a little bit more challenging. And so, and for human beings, let's just be honest, for human beings, to really just get out of themselves for a minute and put themselves in someone else's shoes can tend to be a little bit challenging sometimes. So we just all have to kind of make sure that when we approach issues like this, that are really weighty, very sensitive, very touchy, that you think before you speak, and you really do go from a standpoint of really trying to understand what someone's going through before just putting a blanket statement out there.
Well, we certainly appreciate you sharing your viewpoint.
Yeah.
And for those that are watching us live, if you have any questions and any thoughts, feel free to go ahead and write that in the comment space, and we will respond to those appropriately. You know, one of the things I tend to think about, and even in my own experience when I was a teenager working for restaurants and having some of my own experiences and how I even responded to that, a big part of that was the culture that I was in particular, you know, not being like, almost thinking that this is what certain people do, and not necessarily. I think the biggest conversation piece that came out as a result of this movement is it's now giving women a voice. Yeah. And when we kind of look at a lot of situations, especially if we ourselves have been in that situation, we thought it was just us, and we didn't talk about it, we didn't share it, or we just accepted it as the culture. I worked in a restaurant culture, and inappropriate comments from superior to employees was very common. I remember being told to get on a table and shake it like Jody Watley, and wow. These types of conversations were just a part of it. And especially as a teenager, it made me feel uncomfortable, but to a certain degree, I also accepted that this is what was part of being a woman was about. So having this open conversation has really led into other conversations. And I think that's the beauty of one of the byproducts of the Me Too movement. What are some of your thoughts?
Well, you know, let's just talk about the genesis of some of this. You know, sexual harassment has been around for a long time in a lot of different ways, and shown its head in a different way all throughout the culture. But we can all be honest and say, as culture has progressed a little bit, that things have gotten a little bit more belligerent, if you will, more abrasive in its attack. And I say attack because it's something that's honestly forced on you. You don't really have a choice in it. I mean, I know young nieces and nephews and cousins, and I hear these stories because of just their personal family relationship, of things that come out of their mouths. You're like, how at 4, 5, 6 do you even know about stuff like that? And so it's really an epidemic as it relates to our exposure to sex, to media like that would be considered to be just inappropriate. And so therefore the behavior follows. Scripture talks a lot about that. I won't go a whole lot of Bible here, but I mean, scripture talks about that. What you put inside of you is what's going to come out. And so you just really have to be careful about what you expose yourself to. And so culture doesn't spare any expense to they say it's sex sales. They're open. They don't even apologize for it. They just put it out there before you. And so I think it's produced a culture in this day and age that is almost just completely desensitized to it. Like you could see it on a commercial and not even think twice. You could see it in a movie and not even think twice. You could see it literally as you're scrolling on your phone in an advertisement and not even think twice about it. So there's an opportunity here for us to even really thinking about how we live our daily lives, because the way we live our daily lives in these small little areas kind of lead to the behavioral traits that we see in the culture. And if you become desensitized to it, honestly, it's going to be one of those things like a Tony Robbins where you just kind of like, oh yeah, well, what, that happens? Or come on, and he even went as far as to say one time that he didn't apologize because he didn't want to apologize for something he's not sorry for. And that was like, wow, like, I can't believe even like you have to be desensitized to say something like that, to not recognize that that's an issue. So it's very, very sensitive. That's some of my thoughts on it as it relates to like really just the whole idea of sexual harassment and how common it is. I mean, most people say I don't look like a pastor or a minister. Come on. I don't know what they
say that.
I don't know why they would say that. I have no idea. Maybe because I have dreads. Speaking of dreads, but it's just kind of interesting because like I'll have, women randomly grab my hair. Now that may be for, a number of different reasons, but I don't like it, but for somebody to come randomly like touch your person without your permission, things like that. I mean, it can happen all the time, but I think it's just the desensitization in culture. Of course, I never try to just hold it personally against them, but it's just like people are really kind of comfortable. I mean, even social media makes you feel like you know somebody when you really don't even know them. You know what I mean? And so your first interactions with people are it's just awkward. We live in a weird generation right now. You know what I mean?
I'm just getting a good laugh. Dr. Keita Joy is joining us, and she said, come on through, Pastor with the locks.
Pastor with the locks. I don't know. It's just crazy, It's very...
But you mentioned something that has opened up this conversation, and that's the conversational piece around consent. Probably years ago when I was working at UC at the University of Central Florida, I was on the student conduct board. And we would they would have 2 academic faculty members and 2 students, and we would all be part of this board where we would hear different cases, and we would hear sexual assault or sexual abuse cases as part of being on that board. And I'm wondering what your thoughts about this is. One of the ways that we would determine in violation and make certain recommendations was around consent. And the interesting thing around the way that the student conduct board protocol was written was that if the accused did not ask for consent for every single touch or every single act, we had to find them in violation of what they were being accused of. So if it wasn't, can I put my hand on your leg, that would be considered non-consensual. Or if it was going in for a kiss, if he thought that she wanted it, it was considered non-consensual. So I'm wondering what your thoughts when you think about the whole consent in relation to the whole Me Too movement from a guy's perspective, essentially.
I mean, this is such a deep topic right here. We could really go on this for a long time. But I think at its genesis, it's very simple. There is an order to things. God gives us his order very, 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 very specifically. And I'm not just talking about like rules, thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do this. I'm not talking about necessarily that. I'm just talking about a way you honor yourself and honor God with yourself. Our decisions, the way we approach people, the way we treat people. I think there's just a certain honor that people are missing in culture today as it relates to that. And so people don't even honor their own bodies. The Bible talks about honoring your own body because like this is your temple. This is God's temple. Like he's given you this. And so I think a lot of times when people don't know that they're not their own, they tend to treat themselves a little bit differently. So when you kind of have an understanding that, I get the opportunity to take advantage of living in this body right now, but really God made me. This belongs to him. when you kind of have that realization, that understanding, it makes you live a little bit differently, because you know what, I'm not my own. He paid a price for me. And when I know that, can't just live how I want to live, can't just do anything that I want to do normally. Before I make decisions, before I do things, I consider that. And so I think that's a part of it as well. Another part of it to me is just an idea that people just are way too comfortable. They're way too comfortable. I think in some regards, even if somebody said yes to certain things, have you considered their ability to make that decision and discern that decision? You know, because we live in if we're going to talk about the Me Too generation, a lot of these things happened when they were younger, when they weren't even old enough to be able to make rational decisions yet. So we just live in a culture where it's not even just about consent anymore. It's about being able to make discerning choices with wisdom, honoring yourself and honoring other people. And I think a level of that takes the Holy Spirit, takes the Spirit of God inside of you. So again, if we're going from a spiritual perspective, I believe in being led by God's Spirit, and not just doing anything that you want to do. The Bible says that your heart is exceedingly wicked. That's what the Bible says. So people say, follow your heart, go for your heart. And the Bible says, well, hold up, pump the brakes. Your heart is exceedingly wicked above all things. Well, who knows a man's heart except the Spirit inside of you to be able to tell you what to do and show you the way to go. So kind of some self-checking there, to where, you know what, we kind of need God in our lives. Not kind of, we really need God in our lives to be able to make sound decisions and be able to honor people the way that they need to be honored. But the behavior we see is indicative of a culture that said no to God. So yeah.
Absolutely. And while we're conversating, if you have any questions or if you have any of your own experiences you want to share, feel free to comment. You know, one of the things that this makes me think about, obviously as a psychotherapist, I can go many ways with this. But to your point, a lot of times people from their early childhood experiences learn to not have a voice. So then these situations occur as adults, we don't know how to handle them. Mm-hmm. So this whole Me Too movement, just giving women a voice, and it really being about the getting away from sexual harassment and assault. I'm wondering, you know, the whole reason why we're also having this conversation, and I'm interested in hearing from our viewers as well. And I'm hearing, I'm going to read Anna Mary's comment. She said, this solidifies her decision to homeschool. I love that my kids are socialized, but not desensitized. I want to keep them sensitive to certain things. So thanks for sharing that comment in particular, Anna. So when we think about women and men in this culture where, as you mentioned, sex sells, everything is everywhere, where even when I was doing a lot of presentations about the hookup mentality, talking about how women will learn to sexualize themselves in order to find their identity to that because of our culture and those types of things. Mm-hmm. So now that, you know, we're still in the Me Too movement, we're still looking at a lot of these conversations are going on. How do you feel, just from a male standpoint, how this has affected dating and people that want to date, and all these news stories, and we're talking about consent, and people are getting fired from their jobs and all these accusations, and now there's trainings going on around this whole topic. What are some of your thoughts? How to navigate this world with the whole Me Too movement going on?
Man, it's a tough dating scene out there. Can I just tell you, it's a tough dating scene. But you know what? It's not hope is not lost. I mean, honestly, I always tend to take a positive outlook towards everything. But you know, it's a little bit more challenging. I will say that, just from the sense of people's experiences. You know, you come to relationships with you're so much more guarded. You come with a lot of precaution, and you know, there's not as much liberty to just kind of you know, explore someone with kind of thinking like, what's their motivations, what's their real intentions. There's all these blockages when it comes to the dating scene these days, and just people's real thoughts, intentions. Are they being honest? Are they wearing a mask? Are they being who they really say they are? You know, and so it's just that's probably some of the most difficult water to navigate in the dating scene today. But again, hope is not lost. I think if you really, if you know who you are, if you know where your identity is, and your hope isn't all in someone else, then you put yourself in position to not have your feelings completely shattered if someone doesn't meet all of your expectations. The way this particular subject has affected dating, and I've seen it, man, you know, women in particular, there can be a little bit of a duality to the way they think, because on one hand, it's caused them to say, well, you know what, because of what I've been through, I don't need nobody else. And I kind of take this attitude of, I'm independent, I'm me, I'm mine, and I'm going to do this on my own, you know. And then you have another side where it's more victimized. It's more like, I'm not worthy of anyone. How could I be worthy for anybody? And so you kind of have these two mentalities that can kind of go from this. And so as a man, you kind of come to it and you're wanting to be open, but you also have to be considerate. I had a friend of mine, I rename unnamed, but two Christian people came together in matrimony, love God, right? You think everything is awesome. They dated, everything looked awesome on the surface. They get married, and before you know it, the marriage comes to a screeching halt because maybe there were issues inside of the female party because she had been through some things in her life. And you just never know. Like, you just never know what people have been through, and you might even think you're ready for more and think you're ready to do this, and you're maybe not right there yet. And I can't say it's anyone's fault. It's just something you have to take into consideration. You have to put deep prayer, deep thought, and deep just transparency about where you are in life emotionally. And you can probably speak to this a little bit as well, emotionally, psychologically, like, where are you spiritually? You know, are you ready to handle some of the things that you say you're ready to handle? Some people say, oh, I'm ready to get into a relationship. I'm ready to take things to the next level. And they probably mean it when they say it. But the reality is, there may be a piece of them that says, you know what, maybe I'm a little scared of commitment. Maybe I'm not really ready. You may want, I think wanting something and being ready for something are two completely different things. Just because you want it does not mean you're qualified for it. Just because and I think that's the generation we live in. Like, things are so accessible. Again, exposure. So since things are so accessible, we think because we want it, we deserve it. And that's just simply not the truth. Like, you may want something, but you have to take the time to really, like, examine yourself, examine where you are, examine what you've experienced, and say, am I ready? Am I qualified for what I want?
And Anna Mary says marriage will expose all of those childhood wounds, and that is so true.
It will.
So when we're dating in this time after the Me Too movement, there's a couple of things that came to mind for me as I'm hearing you speak. And one of those things are boundaries. Is really knowing where we end and the other person begins, and also knowing internally when things make us feel uncomfortable to be able to say that in an assertive fashion. I think sometimes from our childhood wounds, and I'm in particular talking about women, is that if they've learned to not have a voice when it comes to those types of situations where there's an internal conflict, we can learn to work in the extremes, which we try to avoid. So if we think we have to have boundaries, we think we have to be aggressive with someone, or we shut down and not say anything, and then you internalize it. So when people, to your point, when they know who they are, they have a sense of self, they have a sense of their understanding of their values and their beliefs and what they're going to tolerate and what they're not going to tolerate, that they can still hold the other person in dignity and express their boundaries and their requests appropriately. And then being able to move through that. And not in a way, because when I think about how the Me Too movement has affected dating, we don't want to be uptight people. You know, you want to still have fun. You still want to be able to mutually move through those types of things. But if someone has been wounded because of this, obviously as a psychotherapist, I'm going to say you want to do your work, because just as the comment that Anna Mary had said, that we can take that baggage right onto our adulthood. And sometimes people will say, and they say it to us many times, Stephen, that, you know what, that's in the past and now this is in the future. The past doesn't affect me, but relationships and marriage are a mirror. So the things of which we have not necessarily dealt with or that are in our blind spots will be reflected in the eyes of the other. So it's important for us to do that work, especially if we've been wounded, sexually violated, we've been sexually assaulted, all of those types of things. Because many times in counseling in particular, many times, more times than not, I get surprised how people will carry those wounds and then they get to the place of being in therapy and have never shared a sexual assault, never shared a rape, especially for men. 1 out of 6, they say 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 females will be sexually violated by the time she's age 18. And for boys or for men, 1 out of 5, and some believe it's as low as 1 out of 4, will be sexually violated by the age of 18. And for boys in particular, sometimes they hold it in a lot more than females. So we have this culture that's going on. We have, you know, early exposure to pornography and to a lot of other things that get into the template. Each and every one of us has a template. So the things that gets fed into that template, we carry on. So when I go back to that time of my own sexual harassment in the workplace, it was already part of my template as far as being able just to tolerate things that are intolerable. So when as now we're in this dating stage in particular, I think it's important for women just to know now is the time to realize that they do have a voice and to be able to speak boundaries. I'm just going to read another comment that I see. Anna Mary, wanting something and being ready for something are totally different things. Powerful, quoting you, because a lot of times, to your point, people will get married because they also think that that part is going to fulfill them, but not necessarily realizing that it has to be two people that are coming together with their own individual journeys, and they're making a decision to have a journey together. And, you know, we also will see many situations where we are wounded in relationships. So let's say the woman was sexually harassed. I hear this more times than not at the workplace. And then she's coming home and she's telling her husband, and he's telling her, well, what did you do? He's turning it around on her and thinking there's something that did you flirt or something that you've done. So could you speak a little bit to when you just think about how, and I know you can't represent all the male perspective, but sometimes, you know, we hear this culturally, I guess I'll put it that way, culturally, where it's made to be the woman's fault, or it's made because she dresses a certain way, or she may have been flirtatious and those types of things. So then people will minimize what has happened to her as a result of that. I'm just wondering if you had any comments on that. And before you do that, I'm just going to read a comment from our dear friend Jason Jones on the dating scene. He's asking a question. Are women more guarded now because of the Me Too movement? And as men, should we be extra careful with compliments, etc., which plays right into our conversation, Stephen?
That is a great question. Great question. And so I guess I'll toggle back and forth on both of these. So when I think about this particular question, as men, should we be extra careful with compliments? I think there's just an appropriate way to approach women. You know, there is, and I'm a little bit old school, so call me crazy. You know, I know we live in a generation where it's like cool to slide up in DMs, and that's cool. Like that's cool for some people. They can right, and that's fine. And it is a way to communicate. So, you know, cool. That's all by and large fine. But I think a woman loves to be courted. And so just not assuming that they like to be spoken to a certain way, but taking things slow. Like, again, remember, we've been to a great degree desensitized in the way that a lot of people see the world and see things. We are way more comfortable than we should be. And so I think we just have to kind of take a step back before approaching people and just consider the way we're talking to them. You know, I like to always kind of think about it like what I want somebody talking to my sister like this, but I like somebody talking to my mom like this or whatever, you know. Just kind of understanding if I bring it home, I bring it a little bit closer in the way I think about things, I might change my approach a little bit. So I think you do have to be careful. You never know what people have been through and what they've experienced in their life. So you definitely have to be careful. In a marriage relationship, whenever a woman, first of all, let's just talk about communication for a moment. I think far too many times men are scared of communication. They do not want to have the proper conversations that are necessary to get clarity. And I've always said that in the absence of communication, there will be misunderstanding, always. And so the goal of communication is to gain understanding. Like literally the Bible says, above all things, get understanding, get wisdom. Like that's what you should be asking for. And so I think it's very important for husbands, especially, to be very sensitive to their wives. If they're open enough to communicate that, you should thank God. Like you should be like, thank you for not hiding it. It could have been a completely different situation. I mean, let's be honest, like people, if we're going to be really transparent, how real can I be right now, Janie? How real can I be?
Be
can
real.
I take it there? Okay, I can be real. Sure. People, we live in an age where people have they work booze, they work husband, work wife. You know what I'm saying? Right. Like we live in that type of generation. And so the reality is those are people's ways of being able to have their cake and eat it, to kind of like have these side emotions, like where this is not being filled on this side, I have someone else over here who might fulfill those different needs for me. And we just have to be so careful. So if you have a wife who comes home and is like, hey, babe, this happened to me, you know what I mean? And they're open with the communication. The first response should not be, well, what did you do? And you might say, well, tell me how that situation happened. Like what caused that? Don't just immediately bend it towards the person, because let's just be honest, especially on the behalf of women, a lot of men are aggressors. So they don't really have to have a provocation. They just do it maybe because that's what they see something they like and they want to go after it. And that could very well happen. And we also live in a generation, in a culture today, where women do the same thing towards men, where women are more aggressive. And I've experienced this personally in my life. Women are a lot more aggressive in today's world, and they see something they like, they'll catcall the same way that men do. And so you just have, if you have communication, proper communication in a marriage that has that openness to be able to talk about something, I think always approaching things from the perspective of we're on the same team, especially in a marriage, and not what did you do this time? It'd be way, way, way better conversation.
And I agree with everything that you said. And what I would add to that, going back to Jason's comment, just put that up about women being more guarded. I believe women may not necessarily be more guarded in the context of what we're thinking. I think women feel more empowered and have more of a voice, where sometimes this can go into a whole bunny trail, but sometimes women can also take on more of an alpha role because they feel like they have a voice and empowerment. So that's a whole nother conversation as far as when we do give voice to that, how that can expand in other areas of relationships as well. But I do believe, when I think of the Me Too movement, the greatest gift it has given us as women is a voice to be able to talk about things that were previously unspoken or that we just kept to ourselves because we normalized it in our culture in particular. So I appreciate Anna Mary's comment, being able to tolerate things that are intolerable. And I'm seeing a part of Tamika's comment talking about, hello, Tamika, believing that the foundation of the mistreatment of women in the Black culture started with slave traders and masters, and they set the template for which was followed by the white wife. And I think I'm missing a comment here. So all great comments in particular. So when we think about as culture as we move forward, what would be some of, and you're all welcome to comment on this as well, what are your thoughts, not only from a biblical standpoint, but from a male standpoint, some of the things that you feel like we should take away from the Me Too movement as a culture, not necessarily as women, but all of those that are being impacted by this? Because I believe it will continue. We're not going to be tolerable. We're not going to tolerate the intolerable in the workplace anymore. We're going to have an open conversation. I was called to do a training with an attorney group earlier this year, to really be able to talk about sexual harassment and these types of things to prevent them in a workplace, because a lot of employers don't want the liability either. So with the culture and the entertainment now spotlighting it, it's penetrating a lot of different areas. So what would be some of the things you want us, not only as women, to hear from you as a minister, but also from a male standpoint?
Well, you know what? First thing is just recognizing that there is an issue. And I think we can speak from the Black experience as well, as it relates to this. I'm sorry, I'm echoing over here. My apologies. But I think we can speak from the Black experience as well, just understanding that when there's nothing more frustrating when we don't recognize that there actually is a problem. And I think we were a little bit hidden to the issues until like the Harvey Weinstein situation and things like that, where people started coming out saying, no, there really, really is a great issue happening right now. There's a great divide in this country as it relates to how this is still happening undercover. As we move forward, I would just say, let's move forward with understanding. Let's move forward with the understanding that God knows all things, and that if we seek his understanding, his wisdom, and his counsel on certain things, we're going to have the right steps going forward. One person knows everything. Me and you were having this conversation, but we don't know it all. The reality is everybody's situation is different. And so how we approach things is going to take more than just, our own intellect to be able to push through certain things. I think it's really going to take the wisdom of God. We just need to seek his counsel. I also think that we just need to take the steps of really just owning up to the fact that that we are desensitized, and we need to be careful about the things that we put in our system every single day. We need to honor our own selves and say, you know what, maybe my mentality thinks a certain way about a certain thing because of the way I've treated it. Most of the time, if I were to ask somebody about the certain weaknesses that they may have in their life, the first thing they're going to say is something else outside of them. And we have to step away from that type of mentality, where we look outward. Well, it's because of that. If we're going to move forward, we have to start right here at home and say, as for me in my house, what am I going to do within these four walls that helps produce a different result than what we see in the culture? What am I going to do right here internally in my heart that's going to produce a different thing than what I see in the culture? If we start with us, that's the first way forward.
So, some of my thoughts I'll add to that, and we're going to get ready to end this live broadcast. So if you have any final comments or questions, feel free to put those in the comment box. When I think in particular about trauma, when we have experienced, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's sexual harassment, how that has traumatized a lot of women. And now with the Me Too movement giving us a voice and giving us hope that there's going to be a change for the future, that now is the time, if these things have occurred to you and you are watching this broadcast, there is help out there. And sometimes we think that these things don't bother us because we're no longer dealing with them. But we all have these types of things. Our body keeps the score, things that we can get re-traumatized. We have large traumas that we think about, and we also have small traumas, so little things over time that affect our reactivity. It affects our allowing people to get close to us. All of these types of things will affect us in our relationships going forward. So if you're listening to this and you resonate with something that we have shared, we're encouraging you to get help and to make sure that this does not affect you going forward. There's nothing to be ashamed about. So when I think about this Me Too movement, just giving women a voice to be able to talk about these matters, but then also to talk about the other things that we've talked about today, whether it's consent, whether it's healthy dating, whether it's having a healthy sense of self-identity, and being able to come to be a whole person even before you enter a dating relationship, understanding your beliefs, your values.
It's
and
so good.
What I like to say is having a PhD in your own history, that we have to look at all of these things that have occurred to us, the people who have been in our lives, our relationships, because they all feed into our template. And if we're going to move forward and we want to continue to have this conversation, not only culturally in our Black community, but also as our culture, as women, supporting women, and the men like yourself who are supporting women to have a voice and to be able to be healthy about relationships. I just want to encourage everyone to get help, because this Me Too movement is just not a movement out there. It applies to all of us as women and as a culture as we continue to move forward and want to have healthy relationships.
That's so good. I can't agree enough on that. So many people keep things under cover, like in the dark, and they assume that that's what really allows them to be able to protect themselves, but actually it's keeping them bound. And we see that in so many different ways all the time, where it's like Bible talks about shining the light of truth on something. And I think really just when you bring it out into the light, that's your freedom, that's your opportunity to now take control and to have the ability to get out of what you've been stuck in for so long. So staying hidden is not the key. You have a voice, use it, tell someone, be transparent, and let the change begin.
So I have one comment that I'm going to read here. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Speaking about trauma, it wasn't until someone's commenting and sharing with us, it wasn't until I went to therapy that I was able to remember a gang rape. So when people have mental blocks, it can take therapy to help those memories resurface. Can you speak briefly on this issue? So there's something that we call compartmentalization when we are young. So when there are things that have occurred to us when we were younger, some people say it's God, some people say, many different things. But I believe that if we don't have the right, good enough parenting and the people around us who can help us reflect those experiences, we learn to compartmentalize, we learn to be able to put them in little pockets so that we can be able to survive. So it's a survival mechanism as a child, so we'll keep moving on. But then when we hit certain milestones, what I'll tend to hear sometimes in therapy is if someone had something traumatic happen to them, then at a certain age, that their children are at a certain age, these memories will come back into play. So we'll suppress a lot of the things. If we don't deal with our feelings and we don't deal with a lot of things we've gone through, we suppress them, they will eventually come out. And they can come out in the most oddest time. So I'm what we call an EMDR therapist, is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So one of the things that we do, Stephen, is that we will help people take their negative memories, because people can get stuck in them. The memories can be flooding them, and then can get over flooded by them, and then they can't move on, or they will continue to try to suppress those memories. So it's important that we can desensitize those memories so they can reprocess them and doesn't have the negative charge, so that they can continue to go forward. Because the psychology term is called disassociation. And I always joke with some of my women, like when we go to the gynecologist open, they have those cute little teddy bears on the top of the ceiling because they want us to disassociate that something cold is being stuck in our private parts, right? So when you think of that whole concept as children, when we have trauma or we have certain things that have occurred to us, we learn to have an out-of-body experience where we separate our mind and our body in order to tolerate the intolerable. So there, as Victoria has stated, a lot of people don't deal with these things until therapy because they're unspoken. And therapy, when you go to a licensed therapist who has a state license, there's confidentiality law. So you have this safe space where you can process, but we also can't just talk about our traumas. We have to work them out because our body does keep the score. So I appreciate that comment. As you can probably see, I could probably go on and on about that comment. So I appreciate that comment. I want to share another comment here by Jason Jones. I think the men that act inappropriate also have things in their background that's causing them to act that way. So what you can make a comment about that, Stephen?
That's very true. That's very true. I think a lot of that, it could be they didn't have any good examples of how men treat women in their lives. I see that all the time, you know, really, where they just had no real legitimate example of what a man is supposed to do as it relates to emotionally treating a woman. I grew up in a phenomenal household. My dad was amazing. My dad wasn't scared to tell me he loved me. Like, my dad was a very, very affectionate man. And I appreciate that. You know, it didn't make me weak. It didn't make me puny. It made me stronger. And then understanding that a man can still attain those roles and still be manly. So I do agree with that.
You can still be manly.
Yeah. It doesn't make you weak to tell your children that you love them. It doesn't make you weak to hug them and kiss them and all that. It doesn't make you weak. You know, a good father shows affection, you know, and I could go on and on about that on the spiritual side, but that's how God loves us. You know, it's his good pleasure to give good things to his children. So as it relates to us and how we think about the male role and the type of things that we identify with it, I think that's a missing piece. Like, a lot of times there's just no example for a lot of our men growing up of what real men are supposed to act like as it relates to women, children, etc. If I were to speak to my own experience, I had a heartbreak at a young age, and that heartbreak led to a series of absolutely ridiculous decisions, you know, and you just have to get to a place where you're old enough to realize that. And it's like, you know what, I'm not going to let something that happened when I was 15 years old, like, absolutely ruin the rest of my life and the type of decisions I make and the type of relationships that I have. Like, I just can't continue to do that. And so the reality is when you approach people from a healed place, it's completely different. You know, I can think about that season of my life, and I can think about the moment where I said enough is enough, and God really gave me some breakthrough in that area. But it was a long season of really just kind of like we would call it eye for an eye, but it really wasn't. It was like an eye for eyes. Like, everybody else gets an L because of one L I took at 15. Like, nobody deserves that. You know what I mean? So you really, really have to take control of that space and just don't allow yourself to be able to carry those weight. The Bible says God's yoke is easy, his burden is light. It's not a desire for you to carry those things throughout your lifetime. It's not God's desire that you would be heavy with those types of thoughts and ideas for the rest of your life. You got to, at some point in time, say, God, all right, you know what? Enough is enough. This is I'm giving this to you. It's not your desire that I carry all that weight. I'm taking that load off of me and I'm giving it to you. Because if we're going to be honest, he can handle it better than any of us can ourselves. So that would be my advice, and that would be my thoughts even behind that idea. Is there are some things in our childhood, especially on the men's side, that can cause the way that we interact with women, but that's no excuse at some point in time. You know, the Bible says when I was a child, I did childish things, but when I'm a man, I put away childish things, and now I do what I'm supposed to do as a man. So you kind of have to take a realization of that, take authority over that, and move forward.
And I certainly appreciate that comment, Jason. And I also appreciate, Stephen, you sharing a part of your own personal testimony, because we wrap that up by saying hurt people, which is why we need to understand how we've been wounded and where we've been hurt, because we will either do what's been done to us, or we will try to go to the extreme, which sometimes cannot necessarily be as healthy. So when with Jason, with that comment, also I also see the other side of it. As women, we also have to know and build up our own self-esteem and deal with our own internal conflicts, because sometimes we will tolerate the intolerable because of how we feel about ourselves. Or if there's a wound and we want to be loved and those types of things, then we will accept crumbs and at the table, so to speak, until we can really work through some of the things that we need to work through. So this conversation, I mean, we could probably go on and on and on. And I also appreciate Anna Mary, you reiterating that fathers, kiss your sons. Affection is not a sign of weakness. So I'm going to say that again. Fathers, kiss your sons. Affection is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of a strong, confident man who can also be that alpha, that could be that leader, but can also, as your dad did, Stephen, be able to tell you, I love you, hug you, give you affection, because we definitely need more secure men and women, which is why we're having this conversation. So we certainly appreciate everyone chiming in tonight and giving their comments. We can go on and on about this conversation, but a couple highlights I want to share, and then I'll let you share your final comments, Stephen, is that we want to continue this conversation. And again, if you've heard this dialogue and anything resonates with you, our purpose, not only from ministry, but also from mental health, is we want you to be well. We want you to be well spiritually, as well as from a mental wellness standpoint. So we are having these conversations because we want them to benefit you. So if you see there's anything that you need help, you can contact us here at Life Counseling Solutions. You can reach us at www.Life Counseling Solutions, or you can reach us actually through the Facebook page. If you continue to have any conversations or any questions as a result of this conversation, we want to let you know that we support you and that you have a voice and that you are important and that you are enough, that you matter. No matter what you've gone through, whether you have gone through a sexual assault, whether you're having difficulties in your relationship as a result of past wounds, sexual abuse, all of those things can be healed. God is an ultimate healer, but he also puts counselors and therapists and all the people in our life to be able to support us. So we just want to let you know that that we're here to support you.
That's so good. And, to wrap that up on my side is, the Bible says, I would that you would prosper even as your soul prospers. So literally, one of the things that God says is that you can only prosper to the degree that internally your soul is prospering. Another example of that in scripture would be, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, body, soul, and strength, but do something else. Love your neighbor as yourself. So you can only love other people to the degree that you love you. And so, like you had mentioned, getting help, taking the necessary actions towards really inner healing, and allowing, on my side, I would say allowing God to heal you, allow God to be able to transform your life. You got to take personal inventory over those things. So be encouraged. Whatever you've been through, there is hope after those situations. You don't have to let the rest of your life kind of keep you entangled to the things you've been through. Let the rest of your life be the best of your life. Continue to push forward. Understand that God is for you. God is with you. He's not forsaken you. And that anything that you've been through, he's able to take those things and transform it into good, because all things work together for the good of those who love God. So, yeah.
We certainly appreciate that, Stephen. Is there anything that you want to share with our viewers about Live Church and any of the ministries that may be helpful to them if they're listening to this broadcast?
Wow. Well, thank you for that opportunity. Yeah, absolutely. If you're in the Orlando area or surrounding areas, or maybe you're abroad and we have a ministry that streams out, so you can be pretty much anywhere. But if you're looking for a ministry that really just kind of speaks to the heart of how to live life, I mean, the very title, Live. And again, I'm not the pastor of the church. Our pastor is Pastor Ty Tribbett. If you have heard of him and his music, he's a notable gospel artist. But Pastors Ty and Tay Tribbett, they are amazing, phenomenal leaders. I'm very privileged to be able to serve with them. And if you're just looking for a ministry, maybe it's maybe you've been to a church that's more traditional, or been around a church that's more traditional. It turns you off to God. if you're looking for something that's like, you know what, I need something fresh, something vibrant, something that can kind of take my spiritual walk to the next level, highly recommend checking us out. We have services here in the Orlando area every Sunday at 11 o'clock a.m. and Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. at the Holy Land Experience. And I'm telling you, if you are looking for more, I'm telling you, this is a place to get it. I love it because we love to tie in things of the spirit along with things of the mind, because again, renewing your mind is so important in scripture. And the only way you can do that is to kind of learn some of the psychology around your mind and what happens. And I love the way our pastors marry the both together and allow us to be able to really take some great inventory. So if you're looking for conversations similar to this, that not only help you feel good while you're in church, but all throughout the week while you're there, I highly recommend checking out Live Church. Go to www.livechurchorlando.com. Check it out. Watch our streaming. Listen to our podcast. I'm sure you'll find something that'll bless you.
Thank you so much for that. And again, we thank you all for joining us. And we believe, Stephen and I both believe, that God has gifted us in order to impact, in order to be helper and healers. So if there is something that resonated with you, or if there's something that you would like to hear through these broadcasts, feel free to continue to comment on your suggestions. But until next time, we hope you have a great night and a good start to your week. God bless.
Blessings.